So Jake will use yours then. I hope yours is working. Are you ready? Okay. Yosef, we ready? Everything's ready? Jake? Yeah. There's always some snafus. That's how it goes. Okay. All right. Here we go. Good vach, good chodesh, good evening, good night. We are... Since we're starting this hour, I'm going to cut right to the chase. I just want to thank, as always, the Liebermann family for being our sponsors for the series. And Shomrei Emunah, of course, for agreeing to host us. And now we'll get right into it. Tonight we're covering, after a little vacation over here because of the Pesach season. And tonight and all the other nights will be at this hour, at this time. And here we go. Tonight I'm covering what I call the Doros HaRishonim, which is the name of a book. It's a guy. And it's a guy's like a Liebermann. He's just called often by his name, by the name of his book. And it's actually, I'm going to argue tonight, it's of great relevance to us today. So let me begin by remarking that last time we talked about Gretz, right? And by the second half of the 19th century, second half of the 1800s, for the first time in Jewish history books are part of the general Jewish culture. Think about what I just said. Usually, it used to be rabbinic literature, Talmud, Bible, halacha, things like that, and to some lesser degree, philosophy, like the Rambam or something like that. History really was a marginal sort of subject. But not after Gretz, not after the 19th century. Increasingly, in the modern era of Judaism, Jewish history books become the basic tenets, basic texts that educated Jews in Central and Western Europe are reading to find out about Judaism. That's unprecedented. Notice even today, the average person is not going to read the Gemara and all the rest of it, so to the degree they're interested in anything Jewish, and they'll take a book out of the library, take a Jewish history book, or at least they used to. Okay? Now we look at a point where it's not even that. But if we talk to our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, and I'm talking about good people, business people, whatever, educated, but they're not, like I say, perhaps very religious, or even if they are religious, then they can't read Aramaic and all that stuff. And so the Jewish books that they get out of the library, they buy in the bookstores, the Jewish history books, this is where they get their knowledge of Judaism among the massive Jews. That never happened before, but it does now. And it's a radically new phenomenon. Consequently, the great impact of Heinrich Gretz, for example, particularly not only in his original, which was in German, 11 volumes, but in the many knockoffs. There were many translations into other languages, Yiddish, Hebrew, all the European languages and some of the Asian languages, and abridgments, stolen. Some of them were done illegally. That's how it goes. The best one is Gretz Farteichner Verbessert. There was a lot of this. I'm serious. There was a whole lot of that. And this is what I'm talking about. These knockoffs is what the average individual read, and so people acquired their knowledge of the Jewish past to a great degree from the popularity of Gretz's work and from the fact it's the only one out there. As regards the history of the Talmud itself, the literary history, the history of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, as they call it, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe the history of the books that the rabbi said in Torah Sheba'al, all that stuff becomes interesting, and people start writing about it because there's the Bible. That's the basic way to Judaism. But then there's the Talmud, and what is that? And how did that happen? And it wasn't written at one time. And so who is this and what is this? Is it made up? Is it influenced by foreign cultures? What is all that stuff, the source of all the customs and the laws that we have over there? no one had ever written seriously in a history way about the history of the Torah Shabbat itself, the history of the Talmudic literature. So, but that's not true. By the time you get to the 19th century, in addition to Gretz, who I showed you last time, had a lot to say in the subject, there are others. Remember we mentioned Zechariah Frankel, who's the founder of conservative Judaism. That this is how his area of expertise and his famous and controversial books were exactly on the history of the Talmud. The Darkei Mishnah, for example, which is about the Tanaic literature, his very interesting Mava HaYerushalmi, which is the first time anybody ever wrote a kind of historical introduction to the Yerushalmi. These are hard kind of works. There were a whole group of others, starting in the 1800s and not before, who sort of critically, for the first time, try to understand or look at the Talmudic era in Jewish history. Like, who are these rabbis? Is it true? Is it a legend? What did this guy really write this? And when they live? And, all that sort of thing. There was Nachman Krochmal, which is a famous name from the past, who wrote a book called Mor Nevuchi Azman, God for the Perplexity of the Time, in which he says you can't understand Judaism unless you understand Jewish history, and therefore you have to break it up into the right periods and understand the dynamics of Jewish history and how it manifests itself in the Talmud and the post-Talmudic literature. People didn't write like this before the 19th century. There's the famous Shir, Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport, who, as you can see over here, doesn't look like a maskil, but was. Okay, there are many jokes about him and things like that. I won't go into now. Would you say you're the non-from one? But and by the way, in his particular case, he's the son-in-law of the Ketzos HaChoshen. He published Avnei Miluim. I mean, in other words, he could destroy in learning anybody around today. Let's get that straight. You understand? He was a huge lamdan. But that's and he was interested in Gemara and all that kind of stuff. But what really turned him on was Jewish history. And what really moved him was the biographies and putting together and deconstructing and trying to get the past. And he's a pioneer in these works, whether you like them or don't like them. And he's the first one to publish critical biographies. And indeed, he has a whole book, Erech Milan, to try to understand the sources of the terms and what they really mean in the Greek and Roman and Babylonian context and all that sort of thing. So he is self-taught, but he knows all the European languages. He's quite an interesting person. Now, most of all, the person becomes the Gretz of Talmud, the most important historian, writer in the 19th century, Isaac Hirsch Weiss, a name that no one's heard of today, but was once upon a time a very big name. Has a 6-volume book in Hebrew, Dor V'Dorshov, which once upon a time was a classic. And he is the representative par excellence of the second Haskalah. The Haskalah movement went in 3 phases, A, B, and C. The first one was in the time of Moses Mendelssohn in Berlin, which lasted a generation and then died out. And that had to do with opening Jewish culture up to other cultures and expanding the definition of Judaism to include more than just Gemara, and things of that nature. But then, as always happens in the Haskalah movement, and has happened in so many Jewish movements down till today, it dies out after a generation because they can't keep the kids interested in this. And then it popped up again in the early 1800s in Galicia and Central Europe. It's called the Haskalah of Galicia, or the Second Haskalah. And there the focus was Eastern European or Central European Jews who have a pretty good, what we would call yeshiva-type education, but a very narrow one. Therefore, they don't have a secular education, and they strongly resent it. And this moves them to try to rebel or change the existing norms, the very narrow Talmudic norms of rabbinic culture and Jewish culture, all in the Hebrew language, because that's the only language they can write in. They don't have an education other than that. And in many, many cases in Second Haskalah, the new and critical study of the Jewish past. I don't want lies my father told me. Get it? I don't want lies my Rebbe told me, because they don't know nothing. I'm going to find myself the real thing. That sort of attitude. And this is the beginning of what we call the modern study of Jewish history. Rappaport, Krochmal are from the Second Haskalah, as I said before, and many other figures. And their books, some knew more, some knew less. This guy was the most important figure of them all. He is from Moravia. Okay, this is the province of Moravia, which you can see was dotted with tiny little Jewish communities. Isn't that interesting? Moravia is a small part of Czechoslovakia. It's not even Czechoslovakia anymore, it's Czech Republic. So it's like a third of the Czech Republic. And it had like 100, look at it, look how many Jewish communities are there. And each one had 20, 30, 40, 50 families. The big ones had 100, 200 families. It's not what you think, very small, and yet they're all connected. And they had a whole network of yeshivas once upon a time. They had to call the Shai Takanos, the 310 Takanos going back to the 15 or 1600s, in which every town with so and so many families has to have a teacher and a school, and not even yeshivas over there. So he emerges out of this whole area. But Moravia was not a place where the Hasidic movement hit. And consequently, it was a mixture, a very interesting mixture, of Frum and Haskalah. Get it? Moravia is the place in which the two mix together, sometimes with straight whiskey, and sometimes with ice. All kind of interesting combination. He's a perfect example of this. He was, in other words, somebody from well-to-do family who went to the yeshiva system over there. He even was a Rosh Yeshiva, one of these little yeshivas for a while in Moravia. So this is not your typical what you imagine as a Jewish history writer, is it? It's someone who knows how to learn, or at least to some degree. He tried to go into business. It didn't work out. It's the whole story. He ends up in Vienna and lives for 50 years in Vienna, where he is part of what we would call the conservative Judaism of Vienna, which is something that once existed and doesn't today. This is a European 19th century phenomenon, which has to do with exactly what I said before. It's a combination of Orthodox, conservative, Haskalah, all mixed together. It was a restrained form, a very restrained form of Reform Judaism. It's not the Reform Judaism of the Reform movement. It's something different. These are called the Wiener Ritus, the Vienna Rite. So, for example, the big Stadt Temple in Vienna did not have an organ, but on the other hand, they're very modern in many other ways. A big item with them was this: they had the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the equivalent of that. A huge emphasis on the music should be presented very well. It was like opera show, which is nice if you like that sort of thing. But nothing I said violated the Shulchan Aruch. You see what I'm saying? And the men and the ladies were seated separately, but the ladies sit. It's like opera house. It's not just a lady section. It's a fancy sort of thing. And there wasn't really a rabbi in the community. This guy with the Rava community had no job. He had a little minion. And this guy, as you see, is the pastor. He's the prediger, and he was very famous. Jelinek. He was world famous as an orator. And his job, but you can look at him. He's not particularly from. But on the other hand, what he does behind closed doors is a bit. But in public, you don't violate the Jewish laws. You see what I'm saying? And all this was part of the particular type of conservative Judaism, I guess you'd call it, that was once upon a time popular in Central Europe. It's a very interesting sort of thing which no longer exists. And Jelinek was a very interesting type of person. By the way, if you want his granddaughter is Mercedes. His son was, none of his kids were from, but his son was a businessman, and he had a daughter, Mercedes Jelinek, and he's the guy who ended up financing Daimler, and so they called the car the Mercedes-Benz, right? So anyway, you learn a lot on trivia. Anyway, the point is, you'll remember that useless information when you heard it. But the fact is, Jelinek, very unusual person, and he established a JTS of his own, a Jewish Theological Seminary of a certain type. In Vienna, was there till the Holocaust, and it graduated a lot of rabbis in its day, once upon a time. And this was a place that was conservative, but to the right of the JTS of Breslau, so to speak. So I'm describing phenomena over here which didn't make it to America. You understand? I'm talking about a European sensibility which once upon a time existed, and yet it's not orthodox. Now, he delivered lectures there for decades. He died. He was an old man when he died, and he published eventually his research in his magnum opus, like 7 volumes. I had it from an old uncle of mine who died many years ago, who was a real Moscow. My mother's brother. It's all Hebrew, and it used to be published a lot. It hasn't been published since the 20s, and it's a detailed Gretzian type of account of how he understands the oral law evolved over the course of time in Jewish history. I remember he can prove to you that the oral law existed in the biblical times. On the other hand, he does not believe that the oral law comes from Sinai or Moses or any of that kind of stuff. He's not orthodox, but very traditionalistic. And he likes the Mishnah. He doesn't like the Gemara. He likes Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He doesn't like Shammai. He's Gretzian in that regard. He's full of portraits, which he takes to the Middle Ages, down to the time of Maimonides. And you can find which Rishon he likes and why, and which he doesn't like. And it was wildly popular once upon a time because there was a Hebrew-speaking audience once upon a time. Okay? Today, who could read this if you can't read Hebrew? But once upon a time, there was a certain type of person who could read Hebrew. Well, let's stop and think about that for a minute. Who is the audience? It's not the average man and woman in Europe. The average man and woman in Europe in the 1800s cannot read Hebrew. They can read German. If they live in France, they can read French or English. Who can read, be perfectly honest, even people who can read Yiddish can't read Hebrew. The type of person who's a worker or something like that, who can read a Yiddish newspaper, right? The forward or the tug, that's one thing. You can't read a nice Hebrew. So who is the audience? It's people, like you say, with a Shiva background, who sort of move past that, or maybe they're reading it secretly in the dorm. You know, this is very much 1800s, okay? Now, it had a seminal influence on conservative Judaism, this whole outlook. One of his students, it was him and a guy Friedman, they ran the seminary. One of their students was a guy named Salman Schechter. Maybe you heard the name, okay? Who was a Lubavitcher, from Romania, who ended up in the JTS in Vienna, was profoundly influenced by that, and eventually, as we all know, ended up in New York City and brought all those ideas and cultures, which didn't exactly work in America because it's not Vienna. Okay? In America, Salman Schechter is really Schneer Zalman Schechter. You know, his father was Lubavitcher. You know, these are seminal works in terms of influence, although most of us aren't even aware. They never even heard of this book until a minute ago. Now, what about the Orthodox? Oh boy, they are enraged at what's happening, but they're impotent. What are they going to do about it? They don't know any history. You get it? You can scream at the wind all you want. Shrai Chai V'Kaim, as they say. What can the yeshiva world, what can the Hasidic world do to argue again, oh, Weiss, oh, Gretz, oh, Frankel, this is terrible, it's Kfira. Really? How do you know? I just know it's Kfir. How do you know? They don't know anything. And so it was, you can't fight something with nothing. And so it was a real problem. What about the German Jews? They're Orthodox, they're educated, right? Oh, Germany, Torm der Herz. Oh, boy. What about that? Not necessarily. Sans Raphael Hirsch is opposed to the study of Jewish history. And I'll tell you something else that many people don't know. Sans Raphael Hirsch was actually opposed for most people to go to college. It's not what you think. In Frankfurt, the school was up to the 10th grade. And after, not the 12th grade, and after that, it's a real shula. After that, you go out and get a job in the business world. You understand? If you graduate from his school, you're not ready to go for grad school. If you got his school, you'll go out and get a job. You know why? Better go out in the business world, start a business of your own, and then you can keep Shabbos. Right? And you know the old line, and the guy without the college education who has a successful business is going to employ the PhDs. No, that's the Hirschian message. It's not what people think. So therefore, he's not going to be involved, or he wasn't involved in, critiquing, the beyond what we talked about last time, Weiss and this and that and the other, going to Jewish history. Hirsch basically had no time for Jewish history. By that I mean the academic study of Jewish history was emerging in the course of the 19th century. So he said, just avoid all this, go through the school, get a job, get married, live and die. That's what the rest of us do. And by the way, to build up a very successful, a financially successful, I might add, and other culturally successful, a community. Okay? Rav Hildesheimer, who is the other big rabbi in Germany, was of a different mind. He was naturally an academic type. He got a PhD, and he was interested in Jewish history. And he didn't like, obviously, everything going Gretz and Weiss and all the rest of it. But he was a person of Pizer Kochos, as we would say today, which means he was doing so many things all the time that you don't have any time to concentrate on any particular item. You get it? He was a tremendous communal activist. He was, by the way, a Jewish statesman. I'll tell you something. He was fighting for the Ethiopian Jews when nobody ever heard of them back in the 1800s. You don't know. And he was fighting for Jewish settlement in Palestine before anybody even heard about it. You see? And he's also fighting to send money to the suffering Russian Jews and all the kind of business. At the same time, he's trying to run a kehillah in Berlin and be active in imperial German Jewish affairs and directing his own rabbinical seminary. You get what I'm saying? In other words, he's multitasking in a big way. So he was, as I say before, a PhD. He was interested in Semitics and history. He has all kind of articles on the subject of Jewish history, but nothing big and grand. He didn't have an alternative version to the Jewish past, and these other guys are putting it out. So what do you do? The Hildesheimer Seminary in general, which was the Orthodox seminary in Berlin, Dr. Kranzler graduated from there. So he says, a very impressive place, but they do not produce a grand narrative the way Weiss had. The classic history professor for many years at the Hildesheimer Seminary, was a very nice guy who never went to college. Abraham Berliner, and he published what they used to call Kugelgeschichte, which means he could tell you the history of Jewish diets and Kiddush. I'm serious. And he has Aus in dem Ghetto, social history, what life was like. Actually, I'll tell you the truth, his books are charming. They're very good. And some of them have been translated to Hebrew. He was thinks in German. He's the first guy got into the Vatican, by the way. You see, way back in 1876, they wouldn't let a Jew go do research in the Vatican. But when they found out he's against the reform, said, that's okay. He, was active in the Jewish history profession. But it's a bunch of little articles, and those things don't amount to a story they can give somebody to understand who my past is, who I am. By the late 19th century, in other words, the conservatives, as we call them today, conservative Judaism, they own Jewish history, and they own the grand narrative. That's all that's out there. And any of you, and I bet you many of you fall in this category, who grew up in my lifetime, and you took this book out of the library, from this guy, or they read Gretz, or they read some, Max Diamant, Jews in History, or that sort of thing, the kind of thing you used to buy at the store. You bought into this narrative. Grazel, the kind of things, if you ever took a Jewish history course in a college or something, or high school, this is all part of this grand narrative. You understand? Modified slightly, not modified slightly. And so your understanding of Jewish history, if you understand that there, is that of the conservatives. Gudeman, all these guys are very good. Gudeman was the chief rabbi. They're all conservative rabbis. Gudeman was the chief rabbi of Vienna for many years. I'm thinking of talking about him next year. He wrote the Erziehungsgeschichte. He wrote a history of Jewish education. Very fine writer and all that kind of stuff. Bacher and Kaufman were legends. They were the two top students in Breslau of the JTS of Breslau, and they founded the JTS of Budapest. And I know it sounds funny to Baltimoreans, but between them, they wrote like 500 articles, 600 articles, and they're actually very good. You understand? They were very fine historians, and they're part of the grand narrative. And you could read their stuff today. Bacher wrote 60 books. Now, here's the point. 50 are good. That's quite a statement. You know what I mean? To turn on that. They were very solid historians. None of them are what you call orthodox, although conservative at that time isn't like conservative today, right? David Kaufman was a very popular guy, and they were going to take him in the Reform community to be the chief rabbi of Berlin. The Gemeinde was run by Reformed Jews. They were really turned off because he showed up he was a tremendous orator. He showed up on Yom Kippur not wearing tennis shoes, as we'd say today. You understand? And there weren't tennis shoes in the 19th century. So in other words, it was something not your formal polished wear. You see? And so, you believe in that stuff? Get out of here. You don't know what the life was like in those days. And so, anyway, that's the situation it goes. Now, in addition, so if you're from, and you're Orthodox, let's put it that way, your past doesn't exist. Your past is defined by others because your guys aren't doing anything. And either you do like Hirsch and say, well, just shut out the whole world, I don't read any books, or you do. You see? Now, in addition to the attack on Orthodox Judaism, shall we say, during this time, in addition to that attack, Judaism itself is under attack by the Goyim in the late 19th and early 20th century. And intellectually, I'm talking about, the story of modern Jewish history is that the Jews got civil rights by 1870, and then there was a big reaction against it. And you and I know that the civil rights were never actually revoked legally, but there was a huge popular sentiment for that. And denigration of Judaism, which has reasserted itself in this year, in our own time, really you can already see 100 years ago and before that. And for example, there was an intellectual assault of Judaism. Here's Delitzsch, the most famous professor, with Babel and Bibel. Baruch, you want to get this on the screen? He says Babel and Bibel, which means the Jews stole it. The Bible is stolen from Babylonian Hammurabi. Get it? It's not the Bible, it's the Bible. I got it the other way around. It's not the Bible. They got it from, and the whole Judaism just sold somebody else's clothes. By the way, you think this is a Kleinigkeit? Who is the Talmud Muvhak? Who's the number one student and disseminator of the doctrines of Franz Delitzsch? This guy, the founder of my department, Paul Haupt, the first Semitic professor at Johns Hopkins University, the first Semitic professor in the United States. You understand? He's the first guy here. So here's a guy who all of his career, his salary and department was financed by the Reformed Jews of Baltimore, right? Even though he was always writing things which undermine the claims of ancient Judaism to be anything other than a knockoff. Life is very strange. You get what I'm saying? Hutzler and Oshagon, they paid his salary, okay? But nevertheless, he put out his things. Now, there's Egyptology popped up in the late 1800s, and Harnack, these are Idol von Harnack, and famous names in which they can tell you, no, the Jews didn't steal everything, and Judaism doesn't come from stealing from Babylonia, it comes from stealing from Egypt. You understand? And, oh boy, the Kaiser came to his lectures, Kaiser Wilhelm, and he made him a fawn, you made him a nobleman. Oh boy, you're wrong. The notion, let me put it this way, they really were bothered by the fact that Christianity comes from Jewish sources. And they really were bothered by the fact that someone would have the chutzpah to say that Jesus was Jewish, even though they know it, but they know it and they don't know it. I don't know if I mentioned last time, I think I did, when a guy painted that, Liebermann, when he painted that painting, or maybe I said in the other class, Max Liebermann, a very famous German-Jewish painter in the late 1800s, and there's a famous picture, Jesus at the temple, and the way he first painted Jesus was a Jewish-looking kid. It was not a handsome face, black hair, and a Jewish-looking face, and all the whole Germany went nuts. You understand? And they went crazy. They said, how dare you paint our Savior as such a Jewish-looking Juden, upon him or something, a face like this, and he had to redo it. He repainted it that Jesus is blonde and blue-eyed and so forth. No, you don't know how big a negative reaction it came out. I'm just trying to show you the climate in which we're dealing with. If you're Jewish in Germany or elsewhere in Europe in the 19th century, the intellectual climate you're getting from the newspapers, from the academia, all the way, very anti-Judaic as well as anti-Semitic. So it's interesting. Now, what about the Frum? What did they say? Well, Hildesheimer had a son-in-law who was a PhD in Semitics, in Egyptology and the Babylonian stuff, the ancient Near East, Yaakov Barth, Professor Barth. And Hirschians used to attack him. He said he went to college. But then, in the 1890s, he was called by every community to come and give a speech in every Jewish community to explain why we're really right. You know what I'm saying? And he was a Shomer Shab. He was a frum guy. It was a funny situation. The main person in Orthodox Judaism in Germany, late 1800s, 1900s, was Dossi Hoffman, okay, who was a very great person, and he was the main student of Hildesheimer and the director of the Hildesheimer Seminary after Hildesheimer died. So in other words, in the late 1890s and the early 1900s, he died in 1921. He was the one who directed he was the rector, the Rosh Hashiva, as you'd say, of the Hildesheimer Seminary, and he was a very great person. First of all, he was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. That's number one. And I'm a tremendous Talmud Chacham, the Shas and Chivas and things like this. The old school, they know Shas by heart. And he was the type of person who could say like this, a Svar, like you're saying, doesn't exist in any Tosos. Like that. And number two, he had a doctorate in Semitics from the University of Vienna. He learned in Vienna, and he knew history and classics and philology very well. But once again, Peter Kochos, a guy like him is running the seminary. You got to test the students. He did administrative work. And he was the only German Jew with education to answer this. Every time there's some anti-Semitic speech or article, or somebody put something out about the Bible or about the Talmud, all the rest of it, he had to go write a whole article for the German non-Jewish newspaper in order to refute it. And so he has something like 700 articles on a whole wide variety of topics. And there's a very wonderful, it should be translated into English, there's a very wonderful obituary of him by this person, the next guy, Rav Tzair. Was a big Moscow rabbi, but he studied under him for a year. And when Hoffman died, he has an outstanding 20-page eulogy or something like that. And he describes Hoffman very well. And he says over here, there was like a hero who has to always repel the assaults because he's defending the fort by himself. You understand? So here you have to write a thing to say, no, it's not the Egyptians. We didn't steal from them, and it's not what the Babylonians did from them. And the way this Reform rabbi wrote about the Marshal, you don't know what you're talking about. And this and what this guy of the anti-Semitic said over here, he says he got his facts wrong. And so a person like this is not going to have time also, nor was he built in this way, to do a grand narrative and tell us who we are. It's just the German Jews felt comfortable. They said, if they don't know the answer, ask Professor Hoffman. He knows everything, you see, which was true, but it's different than having your own person. So nobody, as I can tell you, had a grand vision. Here's a famous book from Dossi Hoffman. This is outstanding. This is very good. The Erste Mishnah. They used to publish these things in the annual reports of the Hildesheimer ceremony, where he can show you in very interesting ways how the Mishnah, if you're interested in the subject, actually went through a bunch of recensions, and that had a first edition, and later on Yohanan Nasi did a second edition. And there, if you're into those kind of some academic subjects, so he says, here Gretz is wrong over here, and this guy's wrong over here, and this is how it really happened, and all the rest of it. Very polite, very academic. He was a gentleman, and he, like I say, was an educated person, and he was part, you might say, of the educated elite of German Jewry. He was at the top over there, but he's a member of the club. But out of this will come no grand vision. Now, what about the Lithuanian yeshiva world? As you say, the yeshiva world. Well, what can I tell you? In the yeshiva world, history is for losers. People don't know how to learn. That's the attitude that you had once upon a time, still do. Or weirdos. It's one or the other. The people who's interested in history and not just Gemara time is either a loser or a weirdo. The two are not the same. A loser doesn't know how to learn. A weirdo, he knows how to learn just for some crazy reason. He's into history. You know what I'm saying? So tonight, we're going to examine the greatest yeshivish weirdo of all times, without question. And that's Isaac Levi Rabinowitz, whose famous book is the Doros HaRishonim. He was a historian who challenged the entire academic consensus and put it under the microscope, where it's a place it does not wish to be. You get it? The academic world is very good at doing like this. Let's discuss Schneidman over here. Let's all talk about him. You see? Let's talk about this person over here. They say, no, let's talk about you. No, you don't talk about me. I'm the one who gets to talk about you. You see? And Rabinowitz says, no, let's talk about you. You understand? Does the emperor have any clothes? So that's number one. Number two, he wasn't a loser at all. You know how to learn? He was born into the inner world of the rabbinic and the yeshiva aristocracy and wealth. But the echelon of society of which he came out in Lithuania is the peak over there. It's Turgdul Mokum Echad. His great-grandfather was Shmuel ben Avigdor, the last Rav in Vilna, who had a huge fight. They appointed him. This is the dirty linen of the 1800s. I'm sorry, the 18th century. You see, he was for 40 years the rabbi in Vilna. He was the son-in-law of a rich guy. The rich guy stooped his way that he should put his son to be the abbot, to be the chief rabbi of Vilna. The other people had other sons-in-law at that time, and they said no, and they tried to get him fired, and and two factions formed, and families got divorced over it, and they fought this for 40 years. The Vilna Gaon was part of this. The Vilna Gaon was on his side. Do I remember right?